Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alison Stewart and I'm the CEO of FAR and I'm the host of the FAR's Cut the Crop podcast series. So today we're going to talk about all things biosecurity, and we've got Ivan Lawrie from FAR who's going to talk about some of the biosecurity activities that FAR's been involved in. Now, the reason that we've chosen biosecurity is because we have just recently signed up to the GIA. So Ivan, welcome. Would you like to just tell us exactly what the GIA is?
Oh, that's a challenging question, Alison, but thank you for having me along this afternoon. GIA is the Government Industry Agreement. It's a concept that actually began with the previous government of New Zealand as a means of getting industry and government to partner on biosecurity matters. The partnership is twofold in the sense that one of the aspects is around cost sharing. But more importantly than that, we feel is that the industry does get a seat at the table right at the beginning and have an involvement in the decisions being made around biosecurity.
And it's taken us about 6 years, I think, to go through the consultation and all the discussions with the various sectors of the arable industry.
Indeed, and that is probably compounded by the fact that our sector is rather more complex than other sectors. So we deal with somewhere between 60 and 100 different species within the arable sector, which means that our interactions are multiple, not only from an import perspective, but an export perspective as well. So as a sector, we had to engage with other organizations that work in the value chain of arable products to ensure that everybody was on board with what we were trying to achieve. So this has meant not only getting authorization and acceptance from the arable farmers, but also from the traders and the processors as well.
So we've established this seed and grain readiness and response group. Who are the partners to that group?
So the partners in seed and grain readiness and response are, well, ourselves, the Foundation for Arable Research. We have the Federated Farmers Arable Group. We have United Wheat Growers. And we have the New Zealand Flour Millers Association, all as partners in this organization, along with the Grain and Seed Trade Association as well.
So we've signed up to the GIA. Now that, I guess, means that we are now more formally engaged in sort of biosecurity. But obviously FAR has been involved in biosecurity on a more informal basis over the years. Tell us a little bit about some of the biosecurity related activities that the arable sector has been involved in over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yes, I guess it brings bittersweet memories because we had a really bad year in 2016 with 3 incursions that affected the arable sector coming in one after the other, and we had to, I guess, respond quite swiftly. But the sweet side of it, if you like, was the really good engagement we had with government and the opportunity to learn from our mistakes going into the GIA and understanding better how that relationship is going to work in the future.
So what about, we did have Karen Williams on speaking with a podcast where she was talking about pea weevil. And I guess the pea weevil is the big success story for the arable sector.
It is.
For those of the readers who didn't hear Karen, just very briefly tell us about the pea weevil.
So in April 2016, pea weevil, Bruchus pesorum, which is actually a bruchid, not a weevil, was detected in a pea cleaning plant facility in Masterton. And it was determined that that weevil had entered the country with a lot of imported seed in the previous season or the previous one to that. So quite quickly, it was determined that we should look further in the country to see if this was a problem in wider New Zealand. and we came to the conclusion that there was no presence of the weevil at that stage anywhere else, and that it was reduced to one particular lot of imported seed that had gone to Wairarapa. So good management on one side, and also good fortune on the side of our geography, which allowed us to reduce the area of where that weevil had entered to the Wairarapa, which fortunately has sea on one side and mountains on the other, an area of about 130 kilometers by 80 kilometers wide. And this allowed us quickly to get an area CAN for just that Wairarapa region, and in a way isolate what the area of risk was. By putting a ban, unfortunately very painfully for the Wairarapa pea growers, putting a ban on the peas for the following season meant that by not having peas there, we would avoid any possibility of the weevil reproducing, because it's again another, in this case, I guess fortunate for this pest was the fact that it's a obligatory pest of peas. It cannot be hosted by any other species. So we had an opportunity. We acted fast and jointly with MPI and the industry, and in doing so, I think that was the key to the success.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the go hard, go fast that we have been experiencing as a country over the last couple of months.
Very much so. I think that approach allowed us to get in early and make the painful decisions up front. But luckily, MPI did come to the party, and working with Federated Farmers and FAR achieved a degree of compensation for growers who were affected, who couldn't grow peas on their farm.
Now, we've had a number of others as well. What about velvet leaf?
So velvet leaf is a much more pan-sector incursion than pea weevil, which was effectively for arable farmers. Velvet leaf actually came in through contaminated fodder beet seed. There are two incursions really which are separate with velvet leaf. One of them is related to the maize, mainly around the Waikato and southern Auckland regions, and the other one to the rest of the country related to fodder beet. To this date, we do not know where the incursion that affected the maize growers actually came from, and there are several theories around that. But with the fodder beet, it was very clear that it had come in with fodder beet seed, because it was clearly established that it was in the rows that had been sown. So in pelleted seed, it was very difficult to identify at the border.
So how are we dealing with that? I mean, it obviously came in. We've been working with MPI. Where are we? Are we close to being able to eradicate it, or is it just an ongoing management now? So
velvet leaf, technically speaking, is at a stage of what's called long-term management with a view to eradication. So that means we've accepted that we have it in the country, but that we still have a good chance through management to get eradication. So this means that there's active surveillance and there's a monitoring of the originally affected paddocks right from the beginning of the incursion, with a follow-up and trace of where the seed had gone. And then what's happened is that MPI has assigned some regional outreach positions, and they liaise with the farmers and keep in contact with those that had contaminations. At the moment, this year, unfortunately, we've had 3 detections in the South Island and another 3 in the North Island related to maize. Since 2016, we had not had any detections at all in the South Island outside the known farms that were affected. This year, we've had 1 detection on a farm which we cannot trace back to any contact with the affected fodder beet seed. So it's a bit of a mystery. It's 1 plant on 1 paddock and 1 farm.
And again, it brings up contact tracing. which is also very timely. Now, what about, I mean, we're now part of the GIA. What about the things that are likely to sort of be coming along sort of the line? What are our big high risk biosecurity issues?
So as you say, our organization, our new GIA organization is called Seed and Grain Readiness and Response. So it has two components to it, and the response one is dealing with problems that are already here, and that's when we're basically being called in as the ambulance. But the readiness side of it is really the prevention and the important aspects of what we can do. For us, it is very difficult to cover all the bases with readiness just because of the vast range of species that we deal with. But we have a fair idea through information and intelligence service that MPI provides, and also through our network of industry partners and seed companies that we work with throughout the world, of what those threats might be. Currently, of course, for all the sectors, the brown marmorated stink bug we know is knocking at the door and is trying to get in. For us in particular, as arable farmers, it has the biggest chance to affect us in maize, but potentially could affect other crops if they have nothing to eat. There are multiple entry points. It's a hitchhiker type pest, so it could come in with a whole bunch of through different kinds of route. I guess tourism was the main one. In the current situation, I'm assuming that the biosecurity risks for us as a country have somewhat sadly diminished, I guess. But we've got to take into consideration that as an industry, we rely on seed imports to be able to re-export those products, because multiplication of seed is a big part of our industry, and that is worth $200 million a year to us. Mm-hmm. So it is a risk that we live with and we have to manage. And
we just have to be very vigilant. And talking about brown marmorated stink bug, I have actually had some personal experience when I was living in the US. I did visit some areas that had severe infections, and I'll always remember visiting a grower who had this beautiful old sort of wooden house with a lovely veranda around it, and the veranda was literally covered probably 6-inch deep in brown marmorated stink bug. And every morning they used to have to come out and brush the brown marmorated stink bug off the veranda. So we most certainly do not want that here. It's quite devastating. And we also have another potential on maize, a biosecurity risk that's in Australia now.
Yes, and so fall armyworm is so predominantly comes from the Americas originally, but has slowly disseminated throughout the world, mainly as a corn, maize, and also to an extent soybeans now pest. It's hard to tell at this stage how it might affect New Zealand if it ever did get in, but we know that these pests tend to adapt and feed on what is more predominant at the time in whichever region they invade. For us at the moment, we're keeping a watchful eye. We do know that it is, for most of the maize growing regions, controllable with the insecticides that are on label. The key there is actually monitoring and permanently monitoring crops and understanding the levels of economic damage that can be produced. So there are good guidelines internationally and countries that have a great deal of experience in dealing with this pest.
So how's the arable sector, given what you've said about, we have so many crops, so many potential pathways for entry of so many different pests and diseases, how do we develop a readiness plan? Because it can't be the same as, say, the kiwi fruit sector, who are dealing with, a single sort of crop, and they've got maybe, a list of 7 or 8 pests and diseases they just need to focus on. What do you think is the best way for us, given the fact we are probably never going to be able to predict what the next incursion is going to be?
I guess it's keeping those very good communication channels open with our collaborators and our industry partners all over the world to understand what's happening in their countries. If we'd had the crystal ball, I don't think we would have seen velvet leaf as a major threat to New Zealand, or even as something that we had on our horizon at the time. So how we can change that is probably to understand better where our imports, in particular in seeds, are coming from, and what are the issues that those countries are being affected with. And then we are also we have the benefit of research programs at the moment that are looking how potential climate change and adaptation of species could occur when coming into New Zealand. And I think that'll give us a bit more guidance as to whether to expect a major outbreak of pests and diseases in these latitudes or not.
So, I mean, obviously, New Zealand has always placed a very strong emphasis on biosecurity research and development. So we are very fortunate that the arable sector can connect into, a wide range of R&D groups who are looking at biosecurity, and, obviously FAR are doing some work as well. If you're a grower, an arable grower, is there anything that the grower can do to just support that, whole of system biosecurity?
So let's say the final frontier is the farm gate. The buck stops at the farm gate, and the grower determines who comes in, what comes in, and in what condition those things come in. So having that as many measures put in place as possible and practical for growers to, for example, control the flow of contractors in and out of farm, and the hygiene of the machinery coming in and out of farm is very important. Vehicles coming in and out of farm, very important. Keeping that traceability that you were mentioning today around, that's been so familiar with us around COVID-19, through using the tools that we have at hand, the apps, or potentially just keeping very good records of who's coming in and out of your farm and at what time, allows us to be able to go back in time and identify, if we did have any incursion, who might have brought it in, on what crop or on what vehicle that could have entered the farm. So that's one way of doing it. General farm hygiene obviously is really important, and FAR is currently in a Sustainable Farming Fund project led by Abby Horrocks that is dealing with on-farm biosecurity, and that's engaging with our electronic tools such as ProductionWise to keep records and tracking of that. So again, I think it's around being vigilant at all times, not forgetting that we are at risk and we are vulnerable.
Yes. I mean, it's one of those things where biosecurity is never going to go away as a top priority, sort of, for New Zealand, just because of our reliance and dominance in the both the plant and the animal sectors. So thank you very much, Ivan. And in some ways, I would like to say, I hope I don't have to ask you back, because that will tend to mean that we've had another biosecurity incursion. But
I'd like to say one more thing, and the importance of the general public in these incursions that we've had. Phone calls from the general public or neighbors who have perceived that they may have seen a pea weevil or may have seen a velvet leaf plant. It's really important that people do that and phone in, regardless how removed that species might be from what actually came in. If you have a doubt, phone it in to MPI hotline.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Ivan.
Thank you.
And thank you, listeners, and have a great day on the farm.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.